Hello, everyone. Settlers Lament back here again. And you guys are in for a real treat because this is my second stream of the week. And considering my recent upload schedule, that's more than any of you people deserve. Don't be mean to prot friends. Yeah, I actually this I guess is a preview of what will happen later. I'm planning on some anti-Protestant disavowal. I really I don't know perhaps the sort of obnoxious anti-Protestant stuff from Catholics. Perhaps I was like that earlier in my YouTube career. Um, I don't know. But I guess I don't think I need to monologue on this issue right now. But basically, I feel like it's very unnecessary. And I know some Protestants perceive stating that Catholicism is true and therefore Protestantism, at least in parts that differ from Catholicism, is false, that they perceive that as being harsh and anti-Protestant, or even criticizing Protestantism in any way as being harsh and unnecessarily anti-Protestant. If that's all you mean, then obviously I'm not going to obey that. But I do think a lot of super autistic Catholic right-wingers are constantly going after Protestantism in the most absurd ways possible, and it's very unnecessary. So I definitely agree with Charlemagne here. But that is mostly superfluous to the point of this video. Like I said, there's a bit more on that I might get to later in the stream. Today, we're not here, though, to talk about religion directly, though one of the videos, I guess, does have to do with the church, so that will come up eventually. But what we're mainly here to talk about is Jordan B. Peterson in two videos that he published recently. The first being a couple months, or the second is his message to Christian churches, which he published a couple months ago, and the other video that we'll go over first is his conservative manifesto. So I mean that's basically what we're going to be doing today. I saw after I had planned this stream, I saw that AA did a stream on this. I think last Wednesday or sometime earlier in the week. And I think Charlemagne was on that. I didn't watch the stream at all. So I guess we're having our second. I guess we're doing the second go at this. But I've not been spoiled on that yet. But that's basically what we're doing today. We're going to be talking about these videos. What there is to learn from them, where Peterson is right and where Peterson is wrong. And with that said, with the unnecessary Protestant bashing, I also want to say that I really feel like there can be unnecessary bashing of mainstream center-right figures in our circles. And I guess it's in the name. I think that's unnecessary. I think actually Fritz Imperial recently did a video on this that was very good. He was talking about something that what's his name? Prager, that Dennis Prager had said recently, where Dennis Prager was criticizing the way that children are told that they're special just for existing or something like that. And a lot of people on the right, as well as a lot of people on the left, were freaking out at him and saying that what he was saying was terrible and that he was like insulting children or something like that. And I mean, of course, we expect left-wingers to just take everything in the most uncharitable way possible. And try to present anything from any right winger, whether the most centrist right winger possible or whether they're more right wing, try to present it in the worst way possible. That is just how left wingers usually act. But it's really unnecessary for right wingers to do that. I mean, left wingers shouldn't do it either, but I know they don't care what I have to say. So just what I'm trying to say here is with Peterson today, I imagine most of us are going to be criticizing him. But with that said, I really feel like we should not try to criticize him just because it's the cool thing to do. We shouldn't just try and criticize him because we disagree with him on other things. If there are things that he says that are reasonable, then we shouldn't attack it just because the person that comes from is someone who we're otherwise is criticizing. But so I know that's a lot of preamble. I'm just kind of going off. Does anyone have any starting thoughts on the conservatism video from Jordan B. Peterson to get us started?
Yeah, I'm kind of amazed it was made. I mean, the conservative. It's the video is a mess. It feels like it was written by a committee. It's verbose. It sounds like my PhD thesis when you read it, and that's not a good thing. And I actually couldn't really believe everything in the entire manifesto seems to be constructed to obscure the fact that it's not really saying anything. It's just reiterating a bunch of principles that I think Jordan Peterson imagines will be part of a big populist tent, but they don't actually make any of the radical breaks from the modern order that are really necessary for most people these days. So it's just this blather for almost an hour. It's very difficult to listen to. Did anyone have the same feelings listening to that?
Oh yes, it's like a Nathaniel Hawthorne novel, except without the juicy plot.
I would say,
yeah. I mean, I listened to it 1.5 times. I was just trying to finish up my second viewing before the stream, and I only got about halfway through. And yeah, I mean, honestly, the first time I listened to it, there were certain parts I picked out that sounded like interesting things to respond to, but for the most part, it just sort of sounded like sort of intellectual babble that didn't really mean much of anything. I mean, there were certain parts that was like really obvious. What I can't remember if he ever actually uses the word free market once, but there's quite a large section when he's talking about several of the values that he's saying are canonical Western values, where it's pretty clear what he's just saying is free markets are really good. But so I picked that out. But it really wasn't until I did a more even though I was just trying to quickly do it before the stream started, I was focusing on it more, and I had already listened to it the first time, so I think I picked a bit more out of it, but I still wasn't incredibly impressed.
Yeah, I would say that this kind of conservative manifesto, first off, it is not original, and I do concur with what Dave said. This is like a committee thing, because if there's one thing committees are known for, it's for producing unoriginal schlock. And this is definitely unoriginal schlock. It's boilerplate conservatarianism, boilerplate fusionism. I mean, when has this not been the conservative outlook in the 20th, since the 20th? This is very much 20th century conservatism in a nutshell, Republican Party in a nutshell. I don't think there's anything real of substance here that Mitt Romney wouldn't have a problem with. I think Dave is correct when he says that it is not really radical in any serious way. And that's probably the reason why it's hard to really make any kind of response to it. If anything,
it's also just radically unsuited for this moment. It's just it feels like this might have seemed relevant if it had been released in 2017 or 2019, but the thing is that right now people are in a position where they're considering making a radical break with the mainstream. And this sort of blather about, traditional Western frameworks in the loosest sense and like good governance only in the abstract, that's just, after the last 2 years, that's meaningless. And what people are really yearning for, and it's kind of funny about this, right, is that Jordan Peterson's sort of the master of the archetype. He understands that you could, and the archetype is really the idea that most people are motivated in our politics by very simple lessons that are told through easy to express stories that have huge emotional value. So like the motivating cause of the last 80 or 70 years pretty much has been civil rights, which is like, that's not really an ideology. It's like a story. It's not like a committee paper. It's just this feeling. And now it seems like Jordan Peterson's forgotten this wisdom that the only truly powerful ideas are simple ones. And he's just released this total blather where he unleashes this verbose thing that sounds like it's a compromise between, two different corporations.
Moreover, it's a demonstration too that the actual term conservatism actually means nothing in the modern day. It's arguably one of the most bastardized phrases when describing politics writ large. I mean, if you were to listen to the entirety of the diatribe, it's not even coherent. And really, if one was to take a more traditional standpoint of what embodies conservatism, say in the Bismarckian context or the Carlylean context, or say if your inspiration is more of Gomez de Villa or any of those sort of people that are genuinely conservative of a past age, really Peterson is just repackaging and rephrasing ideas that are just liberal, but from a slightly past liberal era rather than the present. And I think that sadly misguides a lot of people who actually are interested in finding a political way forward through a conservative framework.
I wouldn't call Bismarck a conservative, but
no, I mean like
yeah, no, I'm just
yes,
just a little
I
autism
understand.
there.
Yes.
But
I would sorry to cut you off,
Yeah.
ST. But I would say actually, yeah, one of the parts I found the most interesting was what was that title and what the brief comments he said about at the beginning, because he discussed his title and he said, I have this in my notes. He said, I played with the title A Manifesto of Canonical Western Virtues, but he later decided that Conservative Manifesto was a stronger title. I found that really interesting. One, he never really gave any reasons why a Conservative Manifesto is a stronger title. He just says that. But I assume the reason is because the title "A Manifesto of Canonical Western Virtues" is extraordinarily autistic. Not to criticize him too much on that. I'm not claiming I don't do things that are extraordinarily autistic. I'm just saying it's clearly not a great title. And I mean, I would say Conservative Manifesto is certainly a superior title to that. But he says at the beginning, right before that point, that what he's describing here is for people who are on the center-right / classical liberal front. And I find that really interesting that he refers to this as the Conservative Manifesto, yet when he actually refers to the people who would believe this, he says people who are center-right or classically liberal. He doesn't actually even say conservative. So I know I don't want to I want to pretend that I'm trying to like mind read him too much, but it seems to me like he is just overtly saying that conservative to him means classical liberal. I mean, I do know there are many people who call themselves conservatives who will overtly say that. I don't know if Jordan Peterson has ever overtly said that when he says conservative, he just means classical liberal. But this is something that's just obviously anachronistic and historically false. Classical liberal and conservative have always been two distinct categories, and they only really fused in the post-war period with conservative political parties incorporating both classical liberals and conservatives. They're completely separate ideologies, or I mean, completely separate might be a strong term, but they're separate ideologies. But he's sort of because this political coalition has existed for so long. He seems to be he seems to be happy to just take over the ideology in general. So yeah, I mean, as you said, the term conservatism is probably the most abused term in contemporary political discourse. And it does seem to me like when he says conservative, he just means classical liberal. And I find it also very strange that, as I said, the other title he was considering was canonical Western virtues. And this is a line he says constantly throughout the video. He says canonical Western virtues, or he has some other similar phrases that he uses throughout the video. And I find that really interesting because, one, he lists off all the virtues at one point. They're humility, liberty, autonomy, truth, agency, identity, merit, responsibility, tradition, community, stewardship, justice, and unity. Now, one, I mean, I don't know if this is going to sound like a left-wing talking point or something, but this really sounds suspicious to me that these are all specifically Western virtues. Now, I'm sure if I were to ask Jordan Peterson, he wouldn't say that non-Western countries have none of these things, or he probably wouldn't even say that the degree to which non-Western countries have these virtues is just from the West. But I mean, I'm really finding it difficult to imagine that most of these things are in any real exclusive sense Western virtues. I mean, the only ones that the only ones I can really think of as being even remotely specifically Western is liberty and autonomy under a very specific conception of those things. But I know this really seems like an odd reading of Western history to say that that these are specifically core Western virtues. And furthermore, he's sort of appealing to the Western tradition But then, as I said at the beginning, he says what he's really talking about here is classical liberalism / the center right. I mean, are we really able to say that that classical liberalism is representative of Western history in total? Again, this seems absurd. And when he says Western history, I think all he means is a very narrow and specific moment from Enlightenment philosophy. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling, but this I think one of the biggest issues here is I think everything he's saying is incredibly anachronistic and not really representative of Western history in general.
Just to buttress you very quickly, Sadly, yeah, I think it's fair to say that what we'd call traditional conservatism and liberalism are a distinct set of principles. I think we can at least say that much. But just furthermore, just on the historical point, because we are all of us on this panel and many of the people watching are sort of immersed in history and interested in history as a topic. And one thing I'm often at pains to emphasize, I say in my RL circles and amongst people that I know personally who are interested and engaged in politics in their own way, is that, you know, there is often a trap that we can have in terms of historical amnesia. And we like to think that, you know, this is the way, and this is what we've been born with, and this is what we understand, this is what our parents have done, etc., etc., etc. But through the entire expanse of human history, and if you go across continents and cultures and whatever, you know, across history and time and places and whatever, there are a raft of examples where what we are experiencing today is not only is it not the norm. What we are experiencing, what we have experienced in recent history, is this tiny, infinitesimal little aberration in the vastness of civilizational history. It's this tiny slither of time, a tiny aberration, and we are led to assume through all media and all education that it's the norm. And I think people lose the grasp of that. And when Peterson sort of goes on these you know, verbal sort of not tirades, but these sort of verbal, you know, diatribes about, as he's done with his video, there's not really an appreciation for the fact that, okay, fine, maybe concepts of autonomy are preeminent in the West, or discipline, or what have you, but these existed under, you know, the French and British monarchies. They existed in the, you know, to some degree, perhaps in the Byzantine Empire or in the Roman Republic, or, you know, the Athenian Republic, the Athenian Assembly. Like, it's not really ever explained properly to people. And I think often those who would call themselves thought leaders in the West today are very dishonest in framing that correctly.
I mean, the thing I really noticed with Peterson here is that, I mean, I haven't really tuned into him in the last 2 years, maybe 3 years. And his intellectual work seems to just have like gone down the deep end. This is not the same person that wrote The Maps of Meaning, which was genuinely an intelligent overview and attempt at kind of like working with ancient myths and the archetypal relation they have to the psyche. And it really, like, watching this, so the one thing I realized that I really want to give as a primer is that he is fundamentally opposed to kind of viewing the world as through a lens of where it's only kind of a metaphysic of pure power, where basically like everybody's engaged in power games. But then the worldview he promotes, and sometimes even like he basically says so, the worldview he promotes is actually exactly the same. It's also just like fundamentally just based on a concept of power and of being more powerful than the others. And this is a genuine, I would even call it a schizophrenia in his political thinking, is that he laments it on the one hand, but then also offers it as the solution on the other hand. And the other thing is that you see in him is that what he proposes here goes against many of the things which he should know, or probably does know, from his psychological past. And this is also something when we get into the video, I will like specifically point out. And there's sort of a battle within and I think this is also why it seemed so murky and so disordered. There's a battle within his own manifesto, not only with it being a power politic that tries to absolve everyone from power politics, but it's also his old psychological views clashing against his newfound or newly taken, what you would call, I don't know, I would call it neoconservative views, but whatever you want to name it, just this wash that seems committee provided.
I think it's the word you're looking for is new political allegiance, because he is someone who now works under new employment, namely a conservative outlet called the Daily Wire.
Yeah, true.
Conservative.
Yes, I use that term very loosely.
It's the
Ostensibly.
new National Review Buckley. It's like Buckley of 2022.
Yeah, I mean,
I actually think that's exactly what I was thinking when I was watching this, is that Jordan Peterson is basically gearing up to be the next William F. Buckley. That this is sort of the role that the establishment has pulled out a chair for him to fill, which is the divider of the acceptable right from the fringe right.
Exactly. Big agree there. Well, we got through everyone on the panel. Do you want to? I don't know. We're not going to sit through 38 minutes of it, especially the latter half where you're going through each of the words, because we've already pointed out that it's kind of a bunch of platitudes about those words. But I think the beginning.
We have to go through meritocracy, please.
Oh no. Okay. Well, let's start. How about we start? And I'll try and keep it to few clips since we have several people. So let's start from the beginning. Let me screen share here. All right, Settler, I've got it screen shared. All good? Yep, okay.
Everyone can see it?
Yes.
Yeah, we're good.
Everyone cannot hear it, though.
What the?
Yeah, no audio.
Another minion fail.
No, it's with Streamlabs. You have to let me look for the share audio checkbox on the window. There we go.
Gibbs audio.
Now this is why I have to do full screen in order for give audio. Let's just try it. Let's do it. All right, Seller, now let's do this. Thank you. Okay.
And was stronger. Now, as I said, I'm trying to outline a positive vision for the future, and this is a very difficult thing to do. This is a test case, I suppose, to see how people respond, because I would like people to respond well. I would like to outline a vision that's very enticing to people, that wouldn't require compulsion to implement, that would get people on board voluntarily. And so anyways, this is
can you pause
metaphysical.
Yes, I think that's a just I don't know. It's like this is just the most absurd libertarian talking points possible. I don't know why we're still hearing them in the current year. A vision that doesn't require compulsion. I mean, I don't know what he means by that, because I'm pretty confident that Peterson is not an anarcho-capitalist. So I'm pretty certain that he supports imposing his political vision by force. Now, I'm not saying that like all governments use force. That means that like Maoist China is the same as like the United States in the 1980s or something like that, or the United States today for that matter. As bad as the West is today, I'm glad I don't live in Maoist China. That said, this is I don't know what does he even mean when he says a vision that doesn't require compulsion.
I mean, the only thing I can think of that would make sense is that he wants to just persuade people without into buying into his vision without forcing them to buy into his vision.
Okay, I think I'll just go in there too. I think this is where he's this is where his appeal comes to, like, oh, why do all these people come together around this one figure, Peterson? Well, he kind of represents this desire in the kind of centrist zeitgeist for that noble lie. And right there, he's telling that noble lie, saying that we're going to be able to bring these disparate factions. We're going to be able to maintain this liberal, multicultural, quote unquote, order and maintain virtue, peace, order, meaning, etc. just voluntarily. We're going to be autonomous, but at the same time, everybody's going to be able to come together and have this civic sense of obligation. And he's just repeating that meme into the future. And that's all like the conservatives and all the people that are outside of the far left, everybody that's trying to keep everything together, they're really just holding on to that noble lie as much as they can, because if they don't, then we're going into scary, not peaceful territory, right?
Yeah,
At least
I say that. We say that. I say that because I've recently been reading some of the people like Ibram X. Kendi types, and their view. I think Peterson might have Kendi specifically in mind, but their view is that there is no point in trying to rationally persuade others of their view. So what they want to do is just get like their contingent in charge of everything, and then they'll force everybody to fall in line, and that sort of follows from the postmodern conception of things, that everything, this kind of cynical everything is power politics. So we don't have to really convince anybody who disagrees with us to come to our side. All we have to do is take over the government and then force everybody at gunpoint to follow us. And I think perhaps Peterson is trying to signal against that view.
Yeah. So I mean, yes, that's good. That's a good charitable read. You're right. He probably isn't like just literally trying to play into this sort of libertarian impulse that I was referencing earlier. With that said, I still sort of feel like this is inadequate, and it's not learning even the sort of more basic normie lessons that I expect a sort of mainstream conservative to have learned from the past like decade. That yes, I mean, good. Like, we can convince people of things. I'm not saying you can't convince people of things. I'm not saying you shouldn't try to convince people of things. I try to convince people of things all the time. But ultimately, like, I think you need a strong understanding, and I think this is really a key lesson that any person on the right needs to understand by this point. That the law is a teacher, that mainstream institutions are a teacher, that this isn't just rational discourse. Like I don't think he specifically uses the term marketplace of ideas, but he alludes to that concept several times in the video. And again, this is just a really inadequate understanding of how discourse takes place. I guess for a conservative manifesto, it's something I think very explicit knowledge is necessary of to put together how things go on currently, or how things have ever gone on, is an explicit understanding of how control of institutions shapes public opinion, that it's not just a bunch of people convincing each other of things. And even, of course, I mean, he is recognizing, I guess, that the people on the left wants to use institutions to force people to believe things. And I'm not saying that I want like the morality police to go around and knock on people's doors and tell them you have to believe all the based settlers lament opinions. I'm not endorsing that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that control of institutions is how public opinion is shaped. And that's not like that. That's just human nature. That there's no way for that not to be the case.
I would also,
I think,
I would also add that there doesn't necessarily have to be a. The law as the teacher is probably the third way between the kind of postmodern, we're just going to force everybody at gunpoint to follow our views without trying to convince them, and the kind of liberal, well, everybody's this rational actor that we can use argument to convince no matter what, because at the end of the day, people learn through inherited traditions, through authority figures, and isn't that what conservatism is supposed to be about? I don't know. I might have read that somewhere.
I think the most charitable read I can give of Peterson saying this is that, well, he is a psychotherapist, and of course in psychotherapy, you never do anything by compulsion, right? Like you always draw out of the patient and basically just kind of lead the patient where he wants to go. So I think that you could read something like a paradigm where you just kind of like assign or give therapy to the wider population and kind of cure them in that sense. But then, of course, that also has been more or less the prevailing paradigm in the West ever since, I want to say, the 50s, and so I will. And what it usually ends up happening is that it declares those on which it clearly doesn't work and doesn't have any effect as kind of like just mentally ill and uncurable, and then just assigns them the, let's say, the status of the undesirables. And that is exactly what we're seeing, like what us are seeing with the kind of like the standard and the opinions of the mainstream concerning dissident right-wing voices, that they are psychoanalyzed into some kind of like malfunction, and then that basically allows almost anything towards this kind of population.
That is very, very true. Good point there, where liberals and like the current zeitgeist is all about soft power, incentives, supplication, succoring, and so on. But with Peterson, that is a very personal thing as a practicing psychologist. I never thought of it from that perspective, but that, I think that really hits it on the money there. So do you guys want to continue? I don't want to include a bunch of clips from this.
I might be something like a broken record, but this whole thing, it's just not suited for the moment we're in. I mean, this was competing. This conservative manifesto was competing in the dissident space, or the right-wing space, or the non-progressive space for attention, with a report that came out last week about how like a number of major hospitals are performing like radical transition surgery on children. And they want to do this. Like, this is something they want to do. How are you going to create a coherent political order with this as some kind of center? It's absolutely impossible. There's no way you can bring together the two sides when this is the default. And there's never there's a knowledge of this in pieces. Like, there's an acknowledgement that there's this insanity. Peterson's aware of this. Obviously, that's how he got his prominence. But then when he goes and develops his view of idealized politics, it's all of a sudden we're back in the 1990s, or maybe 2012 or something. There's no way that this is going to be accomplished without a significant amount of just political domination of one type or another.
Yeah, I would say that if you, like I said, it was nothing in that speech that Mitt Romney wouldn't golf clap at. But I think also what you're driving home, Distributist, is this this sort of undercurrent where you know that he is trying to reiterate these values to people who, I mean, what?
Yeah, I'll put it a different way. Jordan Peterson's claiming to make a positive vision in this speech, but I did anyone miss that? Am I just stupid? Like, what the positive vision is? I didn't see a positive vision. I saw a number of like abstract principles that don't themselves add up to some kind of motivating aesthetic or teleology or some vision.
Yes, yeah.
It's just a bunch of like abstract principles that are, and like people know this. These abstract principles are almost always developed by society post hoc. They're not generative of themselves, and so I don't. Somebody got to this post where he's like, "I'm against positive visions because of Jordan Peterson's cringe." I don't know. This is not what I mean by positive vision when I talk about things like positive vision. What I mean is some kind of motivating religious or teleological aesthetic that's basic, that's primal,
Well, it's kind of funny because at the beginning of the video, he talks about how he wants to start with theology, then move from metaphysics, and then
Let's
move
listen to
from
that clip,
metaphysics.
bro.
Well, I think
Let's
specifically.
listen to the clip.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
I'd
yeah, go
love to
ahead.
see.
Let's listen to the clip.
You guys, it's just 1 minute. You guys are talking about it. It's perfect.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. Okay, and then share system audio.
What might that mean? You can think about levels of profundity. At the base, the most profound ideas are theological, for better or worse, by definition, because they deal with what's eternal and sacred. On top of that is a metaphysical foundation, and that's where philosophy lies. And then out of that emerges such things as normative communication and social policy and normative discourse. And so this is a long ways down the hierarchy towards the foundation, but it's time for a discussion of foundational principles. Part of the culture war that's raging around us is, in fact, an argument about cultural fundamentals. And so, well, I'm going to read this. Now, it's long and it's difficult, and I have to read it because it's pushing the limits of my cognitive ability.
Friends with
Bro.
It's pushing the limits of his cognitive ability.
No,
That,
it's
that
just
was
because
that
Ad
was
went on it.
absolutely perfect. That you know, the whole drink mud commercial pushes the limits of my cognitive ability too. So I'm glad he shares my disapprobation of that. So.
Well, either Jordan Peterson is severely downplaying his the advancedness of the essay that he's talking about, or he is not very smart.
No, he's very, very smart. He can talk for hours and hours on all these live tours for years and years. I think, let's be charitable too. I wasn't laughing at him. I was laughing at the timing of the commercial. But to be serious though, with someone that's so smart, that's so successful in their venues, in writing and speaking and all that stuff, I think the fact that there's so little substance there really shows the spiritual poverty of this ideology, the spiritual poverty of, and perhaps he's in a bubble of those classical liberal people, maybe the Daily Wire or the other people he talks to. I don't think he talks to
Okay.
people
I actually
much
I want
farther
to
right.
defend. I want to defend the Daily Wire a bit here. I mean, yes, Ben Shapiro is like pure classical liberal, and so is Jeremy Boring, and Clayton's a bit more complicated, but he's pretty socially liberal. That said, I mean, I think Knowles and Matt Walsh say and do a lot of impressive stuff. Knowles, more from a philosophical angle, he said many times on his show that the problems we're experiencing directly go back to liberalism, not to modern liberalism, to classical liberalism. And Matt Walsh, I wouldn't say is as sort of ideologically or philosophically conservative, but I mean, he's at the forefront of a lot of the sort of social scandals that have been going on recently, like the stuff Dave was referring to about trans kids. That really is, Matt Walsh is the primary person pushing that. Not just at the Daily Wire, really in general. He's the person that is often covering this. The other person is, of course, Libs of TikTok.
He's the base dad for us all.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not I'm not saying there aren't still philosophical problems with both of those figures. And I mean, of course, also Michael Knowles had Aaron McIntyre on his show, and he's mentioned him on the show multiple times too. So I mean, I'm not saying there aren't any problems with the Daily Wire. I'm just saying, I mean, like that's 50% of their main talent, and they actually I think at least that 50% is quite a bit better than most of what we can expect from the mainstream conservative movement.
Well, yeah, I guess the main problem, what he was mentioning, I think the word that you might be looking for, the Theotokos respecter, is political imagination. This is a term that Adrian Vermeule and others in the post-liberal sphere talk about constantly. It's the dearth of political imagination. The idea that the idea among the centrist and center-right types that this is just the way things are. It could never be any other way. We can never go beyond 20th century conservative platitudes. And that is what they are at the end of the day, platitudes. They're not core, I mean, he calls them canonical Western values or whatever. These are just a bunch of free-floating virtues, question mark, that do not have any kind of reference to anything outside of themselves.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying earlier about the anachronism of this, like, I don't know, if you read, say, Augustine, one of the most important people in the history of the West, would you really come out with the opinion that humility, liberty, autonomy, truth, agency, identity, merit, responsibility, tradition, community, stewardship, justice, and unity, that these are like the core values to St. Augustine? I'm not saying that St. Augustine wouldn't say probably all those things are good. Yeah, he probably would. But like, I'm not saying I'm an expert on Augustine. I've read a bit of Augustine. I haven't read a massive amount. I'm just saying, like, I don't think that from actually reading the majority of the Western tradition, you're going to come to the conclusion that these sort of vague principles he talks about is the core of the tradition.
That's where we're at now. We're at, like, this is the scion that's supposed to represent, Western literature, values, culture, civilization, but we're living in a time where all that stuff is literally like not kosher at all. So it's just like he's representing it, but it's like covered under several veils and several readaptations of it to where it's completely detached. Sorry, ST, you were going to say?
Yeah, I would say that I do believe him when he says that this trains his cognitive ability, not because I think he's stupid, but because I think that it takes a massive amount of cognitive ability to really handle the cognitive dissonance that is within his manifesto. Because, and I also think that is the reason why it feels like it's written by committee and why it feels the way it does, because going any further than the buzzwords he uses, he actually has to make these ideas concrete in ways in which they obviously and openly contradict one another. So, for example, his conceptions of individualism and then also of community, they just don't go with one another. Also, these half-baked ideas, for example, of the free market being a tool that somehow is able, and unregulated markets being a tool that is somehow able to bring about a large quantity of goods to people. I mean, that is something that no economist would ever take seriously, right? Like the first, like Econ 1 is always free markets are amazing. Econ 2 as well, there's externalities and you just don't get around them. And then Econ 3 is basically where you get high and develop an existential crisis because nothing works. But the issue is that I think what he does, because this is usually what people with cognitive dissonance do, is that he kind of like launders the implication of these things in this sort of box, and he just doesn't open the box, but then the box kind of lays around and he knows he has to open it eventually. So he just kind of like in a puzzle game where you don't know which parts fit together, he just like shifts between them and kind of tries to fit them together into something that is more concrete and more applicable. But these things stand so much against one another that it actually strains his cognitive ability to quite an extent to even keep them in let's say, one manifesto.
I would also like to extend on that what Theotokos, Respecter, and ST said about this being just a free-floating set of values. This is the idea of a free-floating set of values is actually very modern, and this is what Alistair McIntyre, not Oren McIntyre, Alistair McIntyre, his namesake, talks about in his books After Virtue, where you have these kinds of manifestos, like the Declaration of the UN's Declaration of the Rights of Man, and there's never any reason really given for why these are the rights of man and not some other set of rights. And these are just asserted by a political body, and we're told that we have to follow them because, well, they'll help promote world peace or something. And none of it is really argued for. These are just expounded because you can't, because without that theological and metaphysical uh, assumptions, which you have to argue for, which I'm kind of disappointed that he did not argue for, but not surprised he didn't argue for them. He can't really create anything substantial, anything concrete. And so instead of developing a system that these virtues are the fruits of, he instead has to just, like you say, take a bunch of puzzle pieces from a box and try to fit them together the best he can.
Just 2 quick points I'd like to raise. What I find interesting about people like Peterson is that Peterson's obviously a man that's, you know, well-read and well-educated. And for those who've watched, I mean, someone in the chat mentioned his, you know, like his biblical videos, and I can't remember who on the panel said it, that he, you know, like if you read his, it might have been ST, his Maps of Meaning book, you know, like he's obviously a man who's interfaced with complicated ideas and a deep amount of Western mythos and the sort of stories that have formed our understandings of morality, of archetypes, etc. So, and for those who have read his 2 books and listened to his more recent lectures, where he emphasizes things like telling the truth and, you know, standing upright, etc., etc., you would imagine it'd be incumbent upon someone who had that personal philosophy of actually then, dare I say, speaking the truth. The reason I emphasize that is because, and this is a point I've tried to make to people in recent times, is that when you look at world history, and you could even look at, say, modern history, this the French Revolution, for some good examples of it, there are times where specific generations will find themselves in a position where they really have to accept the fact that the world around them is transformative and changing, and the way and everything they've assumed about themselves and the world around them or their society, they sort of have to say goodbye to that. They have to part with that. And I feel that the modern day sort of liberal, moderate centrist is not intellectually or spiritually equipped to deal with that. That all of the, to use a Peterson term, the presuppositions that they have assumed about the modern world and all that they've known is actually failing. And I'm not saying he's perhaps doing this consciously, but subconsciously, Peterson is actually dealing in denial, thinking that this system can be repaired utilizing the tools within its own toolbox, whereas the system has actually been subverted and it's almost in a way designed to fail, and that men of his ilk simply are too, maybe juvenile is too harsh of a word, but they're almost too churlish and childish to actually accept, no, our system is broken and it does not contain the tools within it in order to repair it. The other point I wanted to make is, because we've all touched on this, about sort of Peterson's diatribe, where he just sort of talks about specific virtues or traits or broad principles without elaborating. With your permission, Settler, can I quote Cicero briefly?
Yeah, of course.
You know, Cicero is the one person we have in history who deeply elaborated on what the Romans called the mos maiorum, which is the way of the elders. And these traits include things like disciplina, discipline, constantia, to be constant, auctoritas, gravitas, and the one in question here would be virtus, which is sort of manliness. And Cicero explains virtus as virtus is the badge of the Roman race and breed. Cling fast to it, I beg you, men of Rome. As a heritage that your ancestors bequeathed to you, all else is false and doubtful, ephemeral and changing. Only virtus stands firmly fixed. Its roots run deep. It can never be shaken by any violence, never moved from its place. Now, one might agree or disagree with it, but at least Cicero goes to a point of expanding upon what is the Roman definition of virtue, and as a Roman, how would you explain it? Peterson doesn't actually delve into any of the virtues that he outlines to any degree, where he thinks it's A, an expression of the Western tradition, in inverted commas, or B, why he personally thinks it is in fact related to the Western tradition. And a lot of people in the chat have even said, like, how are these things actually Western traditions, or what are Western traditions? You know, at least someone like Cicero made the attempt to explain it, whereas Peterson isn't doing so at all.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. This is something I've meant to say at some point, that what I really found especially stunning is I don't think there's a single moment in the entire video where he quotes a single figure of any renown at all. I mean, anyone. I don't think he quotes or even cites or alludes to or anything. Anyone, you know, Cicero, Augustine, Aquinas, Locke, for that matter, anyone. I mean, if you want to pick liberal figures, that'd be fine too. It's just, you know, it seems very weird. It's a very long video. I mean, not incredibly long, but still, it's a quite meaty video. It's 38 minutes long. And I know that he's trying to talk about the principles. He's not trying to get he's not trying to get into concrete stuff here. But still, it just seems extraordinarily weird that he is saying this is all rooted in the canonical Western values. Yet he doesn't quote anyone from the Western canon to demonstrate
Exactly
that
right.
that's the case.
He makes no examples or elaboration.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't imagine writing something like this and not not quoting anyone in particular. It's extraordinarily weird. I mean, it seems to me that must have been an intentional choice on his part, and I don't know why he would have specifically made that choice. Perhaps it's, as I think William was alluding to earlier, that he wants this to be sort of like an abstract set of values, which is an incredibly modern and enlightenment idea. Again, as I believe it was William that was alluding to earlier, that this was a classical conservative insight. The idea that that conservatism is not just it's not an ideology, it's not an abstract set of values. It's something that's rooted in tradition and history. It's not something that you can just pick up out of the ground and just have it by itself. This is one of the points I was trying to make in my recent video on monarchy. That monarchy is a fundamentally pre-Enlightenment institution. It's not something that's made up by a philosopher one day. It's not something like the Constitution in the United States is just invented. It's something that necessarily has to be rooted in history. So yeah, it's just that was a especially strange part I found of the manifesto.
Truth is not just an ephemeral thing; it is a person. So the crux of this section, and I guess we won't have to get through all the rest of it, because basically what we were saying here covers 90% of the other stuff. But there's this one more thing that he said in that clip. And I know we've been counter-signaling him a lot, and I'm really not trying to diss him either. I understand, I can understand how he really thought about this stuff a lot, and it was difficult when he has no solid foundation other than like classical liberal zeitgeist he lives in. So
sorry to butt in, but yeah, I mean, I want to say, as several other members of the panel have already said, I do definitely think that Peterson is a very intelligent man. I don't doubt that at all. But I don't think that's really particularly relevant because, most great philosophers, great in a neutral sense, people that have a lot of impact, were usually pretty intelligent people. It usually requires you to be pretty intelligent to create a sort of abstract philosophy. Not saying that I'm listing Peterson quite up there just yet with history's greatest philosophers, but still, to be a public intellectual like him, you generally have to be a pretty intelligent person. I definitely think he is. There's of course exceptions to that, but I don't think he's one of them. I think he is pretty intelligent. But I just don't think that's really particularly relevant to the strength or weakness of his worldview. Because most great thinkers have been very intelligent, and there's still been many that have been able to produce.
Right. You have to be very smart to create entire structures of falsehood. So, but he says one thing that's super, super true here, and he says look, I'm trying to get to the fundamentals, right? And he explains how social norms and culture is downstream of politics and law, which is downstream from kind of philosophy, metaphysics, which is downstream from theology. And he says, hey, this is a religious conflict where we're trying to parse things out. Now, unfortunately, for the rest of the video, he doesn't parse any of that out, as we've discussed, and he just falls back onto literally like a liberal theology. But what do you think of that statement where this is all downstream of politics, downstream of philosophy, downstream of theology? And how are we going to deal with that? And is that true? Or are we going to pretend that these right-wing groups or just any political factions at all are going to resolve these things without resolving these religious issues?
I mean, James Lindsay did the same thing quite a while back, where he also kind of identified that, oh, theology is kind of the basis of this, and that's made him go off on his, like, let's say, I don't even want to call it railing, but his attacks on Gnosticism and his ways of drawing equivalence between contemporary expressions of political thought and old Gnostic ideas, which is something I would grant in various degrees and through various layers of analogy. But the problem that both Peterson and Lindsay have is that they like theology in the abstract, but they don't like the concrete reality of it. Because the concrete reality of everything that is that much idealistic is that it is very divisive, right? Like, I mean, like, imagine like the things over which the churches are divided, right? Like, we agree on what, like, more than 99.9% of issues. But these very small differences, I mean, between the East and the West, for example, between leavened and unleavened bread, and the entire, like, the magnitude this unfolds into, which is, of course, why it can't just be laid aside and said, oh, who cares, it's just bread. Like, the magnitude this unfolds into, because it is so fundamental, so deep down, is something that people like Peterson or Lindsay just generally don't have the time for. I mean, they're not even on board with the whole Christianity thing at all, right? Which is why he always, again, that also is just the root of his cognitive dissonance in the end. You said the beautiful sentence that I actually also said when he was talking about truth. It's like, truth is a person, you can talk to him. And without having that kind of fundament, without having the presence of the Christian story and the understanding of why it is so important, and only so important if it is exactly the way it is told, then he only can get a philosophical appreciation for theology as a kind of like superlative metaphysic, but he can never really understand or appreciate theology as it exists in the world around him.
I would have settled for a metaphysical system, but we didn't even get that. We didn't get that. We didn't get like a political thing. We didn't get much less a theology. We got like a set of platitudes that he's trying to do. Unless he's trying to start with the set of platitudes and work backwards from there, what kind of political, metaphysical, and the theological system can we use to justify these platitudes, which is not the right approach, I don't think. But
well, I mean, this is all stemming from Lindsay kind of highlights. I mean, James Lindsay has made some pretty significant contributions, but the guy is kind of an idiot. I mean, he either is an idiot or he has some massive blind spot in his thinking that this forces him to carry on these ridiculous attacks on people and on ideas that he thinks are outside of some supposed mainstream new atheism that he embraced as a young, early 20-year-old. And I don't know what to make of this. The common thread between both of them is this desire to bring back the previous world as it existed. And really, I don't know how much we need to intellectualize these contortions, because they are all just contortions. And as long as you're thinking in terms of big tent or in terms of coming up with isolating principles that you think that people will agree on without force, you're just not interacting with the world that we live in right now. These things mean so little to me. You can't even get into dialogue with the left at this stage. In 2018, I think Peterson actually, he had that whole debate with Zizek. I mean, could you imagine something like that happening with another leftist? Has that happened recently? He's effectively deplatformed as far as the mainstream is concerned. So these types of Big Ten, resurrect the 1990s ideas, it's so irrelevant to our own times, and that just shows how disconnected they are from reality, I guess. And I can't get over this. I'm actually more baffled that these people still have fans. I can't really piece it together. To me, it just seems, I guess people just need to see more, which is kind of amazing. But
look at the comments on all these videos. People are saying like, it's like truth is just flowing out of his mouth. It's like, wow, this is the intellectual age. That is the best. This is the best ideas ever.
The best intellectual timeline. Yeah, good Lord. This is, I don't exactly know what to believe here, but I don't know I really wish we had a defender of Jordan Peterson on here, but I'm genuinely curious how people like Lindsay and Peterson resolve. Peterson's obviously better when he's with Peg Joe, because Peg Joe understands that what the West needs is a motivating spirituality and a motivating aesthetic vision for the future. Like a simple one that is expressible in terms of very basic archetypes, not some kind of elaborate compromise or PhD thesis. And so Pajot understands that, but Lindsay doesn't even have that connection. And so I honestly don't know how younger people in particular reconcile this in their own minds. I think for a man of Jordan Peterson's age, it's more understandable. But how does a young person see what we've seen and convince himself that, this is the first step to some kind of broader dialogue that's going to conquer the existing political institutions? I don't see how that people can really tell themselves this story. I don't know if anyone else has experience, but my run-ins with people who follow these ideas unironically hasn't really been very enlightening on this front.
I mean, as someone who was like a normie conservative for a while, I can just simply say that it is a lack of political imagination.
Yeah, but that was like in 2016 or before. Like I'm talking about like after COVID, after countless institutional shenanigans that have come out of 2021 and 2022, and the ones we've seen them admitting to from 2020. There's something deep going on here that's not just something about like isolating these principles.
Well, everybody in chat says it. They all say cult, and that's basically the answer: is that he has just a cult of personality. We are living in an age, of course, the fracturing of the political kind of like framework that you have results just in these like a spread of cults, different cults that communicate with one another less and less and less and less, that isolate more and more, that kind of like thereby.
But it's not just Peterson. Like this is a whole archetype of people.
Exactly.
Like, exactly. They're not all like, the entire boomer generation isn't in a personality cult. Like this is a mode of thinking.
No, there are many.
I don't know. That to me, that doesn't really match the definition of personality cult.
Yeah, I would say that it would explain the young people, at least. The boomers might have a very different understanding that comes from the fact that they were raised on this, and so they don't really have anything else. You could use that to explain why the young people are like this too, that they were raised on this and they don't know anything else. They don't have anything to draw upon. And most of them do not have the will to look for something outside of what they have. They're just reaching for the easy button.
Yeah, we can, like David can hope that maybe young people aren't buying this stuff, but it's just that boomers, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But with Zoomers, it's just like their mind has been melted by social media, vaping, and seed oils. So it's like, unless you're, let's put it lightly,
approve of this message.
neurodivergent. Oh yeah, that's right, Piers. Unless you're, to put it lightly, neurodivergent, it's kind of hard to break out of this glass ceiling.
So just on the point of the boomers, is something I think I want to mention is a friend of mine who recently closed his blog, who went by Esoterica Americana and also is a co-host on my history series. He made this interesting observation and kind of like started tracking down how during the youth of the boomers, like bands like the Beatles or the Grateful Dead and so on and so forth, they were actually designed, like intentionally designed to function as cults. So the entire idea of the Cold War at the time actually was, from a more elite or academic perspective, was that the way you keep the population peaceful is that you kind of subdivide it into various cults, which you can manipulate, let's say, in certain ways. So in many ways, what we're seeing today and the cultification of society, which I think is something that's undeniable, and again, is the reason why we can't really have dialogue anymore, is just the outcome of the success of that kind of project, where you very intentionally induce cult behavior in various subgroups of the population, kind of create a portfolio of different fandoms, and then kind of play them top down into various niches, so that in the end, what of course they tried to prevent back then was just a socialist or communist uprising, so that everybody was always kind of kept within his own little circles and didn't really become dangerous for the wider society.
That's very true, SD. One thing I just wanted to buttress your point on, because you sort of mentioned sort of subgroups and whatnot. It sort of reminds me too of the idea of because sport and physical contest has a really deep tradition in the West. It goes far back as, say, the ancient Greek Olympics. Even within the Roman legion, they used to have boxing contests between champions in the legion. I mean, pugilo is an Italian Latin word. In medieval times, we have the joust and dueling, and that has existed now. Those kind of things have existed now in our civilization for literally thousands of years. So we inherently like them. But what has sort of happened today is we sort of have the sports ball meme, and it's quite true. We actually dissipate this energy where we have traditionally we had either positive, or we had from the context of survival and evolutionary conditioning, we have like a healthy dose of tribalism, whereas today it's dissipated through sports ball. It's dissipated through, I like this band, or I like that band, or I like this fandom and that fandom. And by doing that, we actually dissipate our energy rather than being aware of external threats that are actually palpable, or we need to cultivate a sense of belonging to things that matter, like family, like community, like clan. It's instead, I mean, you're German, so yeah, I like Schalke. I like Borussia Dortmund. Yeah, and it could be I like Manchester United or Leicester City and all these sort of things. And we just it's all a part of this apparatus to actually diffuse common people's energy from things that matter into things that don't. And it's one part of how they have actually made this system work for so long.
My extended family actually sponsors one of Germany's major football clubs, and it was explained to me how the stadium actually is a sort of social engine. Like there's like real, like, let's say, engineering going on in kind of like manipulating the different types of fans that you have into creating a sort of stadium atmosphere that works in certain ways. And all of that is like, none of that is like secret or anything. It's just tricks of the trade, basically. And it goes the same with modern marketing. Almost. Yeah. Something I want to mention, because I just saw it in the chat. Somebody sent in the super chat. Can I mention the super chat, Settler? Oh, he's, I don't know.
Sorry, yes, I was here. I was just looking for the unmute button. I was in a different tab.
Okay.
Yeah, the first super chat or the recent one?
The 499 one. I don't know if it's the first one.
That's the reason.
Yeah, that's the recent one.
Okay, so yeah.
Yeah, I'll highlight that. Yes, I mean, I'll read out the Dashing Rogue for $4.99. The biggest problem with Jordan Peterson is he's a sophist and pushes drugs. Also, look up his connection to Timothy Leary and Crowley. I have no idea about this connection, not something I've ever heard of previously, so I don't want to speak on it.
Yeah,
and I also, I mean, I would not call Peterson a sophist, so I would not agree with that assessment. That despite generally disagreeing with Peterson on this stuff, and I don't really know his history with pushing drugs, so I can't speak on that either. But thanks for the super chat.
So the reason I want to mention that is, do people here know who Timothy Leary is?
No,
I don't. Sorry.
Okay, so Timothy Leary published or publicized a psychological construct that was called the 8 circles, I think, or 8 levels model of consciousness, where he basically said that had an idea of framework of how consciousness develops. But the interesting thing is that consciousness as we have it today actually is in the, I think, 4th or 5th circle. And then there's further circles going farther out. And he takes this from is kind of like bad understandings of the academic literature and then bad understandings of Carl Jung and his concept of consciousness, just for reference. Like, for example, for Carl Jung, Christ is God and he also is the uplifter of our consciousness. So for Leary, on the other hand, consciousness is something that you kind of ascend in, and that is also Leary and Crowley are very much linked. Leary is also linked with various then emerging cult movements such as Discordianism, chaos magic, and stuff like that. If anybody has ever heard of that in the chat, and the hippie movement. And Leary actually he is mainstream, or he's like deep in the psychological academia. Like he really was popular there, and is read to this day. And his his model is now, I think, seen as kind of outdated, but it still was hugely influential. And the mark that it left on Western culture should not be understated. So, for example, he gave the justification that actually the hippie movement, the reason it was successful was that they had achieved the next level of consciousness, and that is where we're all going. So if you watch something like Stargate, you will see that the advanced civilizations, they all behave like hippies. That's Leary. That's his influence. Also the idea, so his final idea is that the final stage of consciousness is that which prepares us for going into the stars and becoming a starfaring civilization. So basically we to do that, right, we become starfarers and also achieve this final level. There's an entire, subgenre of ideas about aliens, galactic civilizations, all of that jazz that develops out of this, because people say, oh, well, this is the academic consensus. This is kind of like the best our scientists have to offer. And they just run with it. And it's a huge, it's massively destructive to the Western conception of psychology and consciousness. And so I find it weird that he brings it up in terms of Peterson, because in many ways Peterson stands as the turning point against this, as the turning point to what is more, let's say, a more we could even say classic Jungianism and classic Jungian understanding of the psyche, and something that goes against the kind of like mystification of the consciousness and puts it back into a special seat, but not a, let's say, magical seat. So I would say that it is completely the opposite. If anything, Peterson steers away from Leary.
Well, you definitely stunned me with your brilliance there, because I don't think I understood any of what you said, but thank you very much.
Sorry.
Can I just slightly add on to what ST said?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just because you sort of mentioned like the stars and space exploration, whatever, it's kind of like how for some people who sort of have that political persuasion, they sort of imagine it'll be Star Trek will be sort of pacified, sort of technologically advanced space communism, but instead what you actually get is something more like oh god, I've just forgotten that Stallone movie. Saigon did a video on it.
Demolition Man.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, Demolition Man. You actually get Demolition Man where your society is so impotent and made flaccid essentially in spirit and in character and even physically that you actually struggle to function at the first hurdle of obstacles, and the intent and the actuality end up being two very different destinations.
All right. So
I would like it to do another super chat. This is the only other one we have. The Hungry Die Merchant for $5. I don't mind center right / centrists being tame or PC, but if your analysis takes no radical account of the last 3 years, it's wildly out of touch. Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with this quite a bit. Like what I was saying about the Daily Wire earlier. And like I said, I do think Jeremy Boring and Ben Shapiro, their views are extremely flawed. But I am generally impressed by Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh, though there's still significant problems. So I really feel like we can sometimes be way too condescending of normies and mainstream conservatives and stuff like that. So I definitely agree with what this person is saying, that that like we shouldn't look down on people just because they don't have the same views as us, just because they're too moderate, something like that. But there is a certain degree. I mean, one of the things that really sort of I don't know really stunned me, that I'm still hearing these same talking points from the Peterson from the Peterson video, the first one, is the amount of stuff he was talking about the free market. I just kept on thinking that it's like, are we really doing this in the current year? We're still obsessed with the free market. Like, is this really what's getting people going still? Like I remember like a decade ago caring about this. Do I know? I mean, this is probably, I'm doing exactly what this guy was saying, not to do of like looking down on mainstream people. It's just are the problems we've been having, the acute problems over the past couple of years, and the more general problems, are they really a battle between socialism and the free market? It just seems so out of touch to believe that the freedom or lack of freedom of marketplaces is like the central issue going on.
Notice how when you said Daily Wire, your favorite people there, the ones that are, I don't want to say least cringe, but the ones that are like most on the money are the ones with a more coherent theology. But
the Catholics
and the less orientation towards a materialist outlook too.
Right. It's not even just it's just they're Catholic and I'm Catholic and everything. But the other ones, it's like they could have a more coherent theology, but they do half measures with it, where it's like Clavin, I don't even know what he's doing. Maybe he has.
I mean, I think both. I could be wrong about this. So I don't want to canonize anyone, but I'm pretty sure I've heard both Jeremy Boring and Andrew Clavin say they do not believe in scriptural inerrancy. So it's not like they're like super evangelical or something. I mean, Clavin, I know, I think he's a high church Anglican. He's definitely Anglican. And he's pretty liberal on, sort of a lot of those sorts of things. The religious sorts of things. But I could be, so I know, I mean, I don't specifically remember him saying that he doesn't believe in scriptural inerrancy. So I could be wrong about that. I'm pretty sure I do remember Jeremy Boring overtly saying once, though, that he doesn't. So yeah, I mean, it's not there. It's not like there's those figures are like super conservative.
So I'll put it this way.
Sorry.
I'll put it this way. Sorry. Yeah. Like, so the problem is that it's not so much like that there isn't an economic issue that's fundamental. There is, but it's sort of like the issue with wokeness that's fundamental. The issue with wokeness that's fundamental is how we chose to implement civil rights at a foundational level. How we did this, how we chose to reorganize our constitution around group-based but basically group-based forced integration. And this is what causes all of the problems that we now experience in wokeness, because by the time we encounter them in the culture war, they're halfway to being law. And the same thing is true for the economics problem. You could argue somewhat convincingly that a lot of our problems do stem from these bad economic concepts, but these all come from like loose money policies that have to do with central banks printing money and managing interest rates, which goes back like at this point almost 100 years. And I guess you could say it was fully implemented when we went off the gold standard or something like that. But we've been going down this road for a very long time. And so the idea is to arrest it at this stage and kind of trying to make a police action around it. That's what immediately comes to my mind when I hear free market. I mean, how much like free market after 2008 means that there's like moral risk in the market, but obviously the banks don't suffer moral risk because they're too big to fail. And obviously the government gets to spend infinite money because they control printing presses, and they just dump the money into the economy so that line go up, which basically means that anyone who's rich enough to have a significant amount of money invested just makes money for breathing. And then we're going to lecture people about like moral hazard. Yeah, exactly. And then we're going to after all that's been accomplished 60 years ago, or more recently, we fessed up to it in 2008 that this is how things worked. We're gonna then we're gonna complain about free market. It's like the whole college debt thing, right? Like this is the point where people actually have to start paying their debts, right? Like, and we were so far away from the sanity that they're talking about, and if they're going to convince me that they actually want to break with this in a meaningful way, they're going to have to break with something that's more fundamental. Like Jordan Peterson's going to have to just say, like, the Fed, just abolish all central banking, clear out our entire class of bureaucrats that manages banking regulations, and, completely reform everything. He's never going to say anything like that. That's just, that's why it sounds like this crazy committee document.
I agree. To respond to a comment, Clavin's ACNA, that is true. So to be clear, Clavin is as this person says, a part of the Anglican Church North America, which is a conservative breakaway Anglican group, and they are fairly conservative. And to be clear, when I said Clavin's liberal on a lot of religious issues, he is very pro-life. So he's definitely not liberal on that. But no, I mean, I do know, even though he's a part of the ACNA, which is generally very good on the sort of social issues other than women priests, which they don't have women bishops, but they do have women priests on a diocese by diocese basis. They decide whether or not you can ban women priests in the ACNA. But I do know Clavin has overtly said that he doesn't think sex before marriage or same-sex acts are intrinsically sinful. So even though he's a part of a relatively conservative group, he doesn't really hold conservative opinions on that type of stuff. So sorry, I just wanted to make sure, since I brought that up, that I made his position clear.
So we want to do
can I just
the next one?
21st, can I just Dave for a second, just on the market thing, and basically what Dave said was right. Just a couple of things I just do want to add is that there's almost something pitiful to claims that we need to aspire to the free market. Like we sort of need to go back to sort of Chicago school when if any of you who have yourselves or family or friends or whatever who run businesses, you make one mistake on a tax return and the IRS will be 3 feet down your throat. Meanwhile, you can be Lehman Brothers. I mean, I know they fell over in 2008, but you can be a bank who lends way beyond their
probably Goldman Sachs, right?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, Goldman Sachs, right? Or Bank of America, or whatever. You can just lend money willy-nilly without actually adhering to any sound banking principles of risk mitigation, or even having a percentage of one's deposits actually sitting in a vault in hard currency or gold or whatever. And then if you're at the big end of town with political connections, then, well, as did happen in 2008, bank CEOs and executives got paid bonuses when they were forced to resign due to public backlash. Meanwhile, Mr. Jones down the road with the hardware store, well, he makes a $1,500 error on his tax returns, and well, he's going to get prosecuted. We've got this sort of upside down system that is very inherently unjust. And the second thing too is to people who sort of think like Peterson, is that we have to understand that between whether it's the state's interference with the market or just how the market works within itself, is that it's a part of how you might say they've maintained control and how they've sort of assisted political shift or ideological shift is that what we've had is as the state has expanded and the bureaucracy and the administration of that has expanded to support the expanding bureaucracy and welfare state, is we've seen a massive wealth transference from, and not even I don't think it's even so much class anymore. It's almost political affiliation, where certain groups will be targeted. Be it farmers or be it small business people, whatever, and those who have the hands on the levers of power will subsidize their friends. And what we have to understand is that markets should exist in an ideal sense, should enrich a society or its people, and it should work to the advantage of its people, or should supplement a society, right? It's a manner by which people within a society should be able to exchange goods and services and currency, right, with minimum fuss. But instead, what we've seen is we saw it with the Canadian truckers, we saw it with COVID, with the lockdowns, and the punitive measures that were placed upon those who defied, the narrative, etc. We've seen it with the aftermath of the last US election. I'll keep it at that. We've seen it. There's examples here in Australia where we had sort of similar malfeasance from a sort of banking / crypto / government perspective of people being prosecuted literally at the point of having their bank accounts liquidated. That the market is actually being used as a weapon against political opponents. So when Peterson makes appeals to the free market, very, very illusionary, and someone that smart is either up to their neck in delusion or he's being dishonest.
All right, so shall we move to the Christian churches one article? Message to the Christian churches.
Well,
Well, first
I wanted some other points.
Oh, there's two, but we got keep the topics flowing, bro. Too much economy, bro. Here it's gonna
just
kill
okay,
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if we can't get around to that, we can always do another live stream later on it. I mean, we're already like 3/4 of the way through the stream.
Okay, something I definitely want to get out before this ends is that I love how he talks about this like seeing everything in terms of power and organizing society around the power and so on and so forth. And that is kind of his critique of the other side, let's say, right, of the evil side. And then when he talks about meritocracy, which he kind of like wants to uphold as a central virtue, right? What does does anybody here remember what he wants meritocracy to exactly be?
No, I don't remember what he specifically said.
He wants meritocracy to be oriented around the people who have the highest ability to do the things to which kind of the task pertains. Which, I mean, if there's any engineers in the audience or maybe on this panel or people in physics or something like that, the ability to do work is power. Right? There is power. That's the literal definition of it. So he really just like, and that's the thing with it. When we also just stress the cognitive dissonance in it, is he has nothing to offer that isn't just the same basic framework, the same, we can say, theology, the same metaphysic that which he criticizes offers already. And I think in many ways there is a sort of personal existential element on his behalf in this, in that he doesn't know how to conceive of the world in another sense that isn't one that is based on a substrata of just power politics and just the allocation of power. But he also sees where that leads to. And that, I think, that is actually his fundamental conflict within himself. Because also, I mean, all of his advice is actually like what made him famous is young men need to be honest about and like say openly, we want to become powerful, right? It's all within this framework of trying to become more powerful and of trying to use power. And then towards the question of, well, let's say who oversees that, right? What is good use and bad use of power? There's nothing intrinsic in what he sees that can really answer that. And so he just kind of like laments that there's bad uses of powers, but he doesn't like really have anything to offer. And that, I think, that is kind of the underlying like reason for all of this.
Yeah, I think this is sort of like a classic liberal flaw, like sort of centrist liberal or libertarian issue, is that they are so upset with like the authoritarians or the totalitarians or whatever, or the progressives being unliberal and wielding power in a bad way, that it prevents them from really developing a philosophy of how power actually operates, because they have like PTSD almost from the bad uses of power, that they can't really conceptualize what the good uses are. William, did you have something to say?
No, I think that's. I think I've covered just about everything I wanted to say.
Okay, I
this
just saw you were
juncture.
unmuted, so I wasn't sure.
Shall we do another clip from the video?
Well, one sec. There's another super chat.
Mhm.
Merrick, for $20. Peterson's first act in the mainstream was to show how bad liberalism has become. His liberal reaction to the problem showed us how useless liberalism is for real reform. This is cringe to anyone who has abandoned liberalism. Yeah, I mean, I basically agree with that analysis.
All right.
So did you have any other clips in particular?
Yes, let's do it. Let's switch it up a little bit. Boom. Plot twist. Are you guys watching? Are you guys watching? Plot twist. This is a different clip, but it's just a 1 minute clip. I want to see your candid reaction to this.
Go ahead.
One thing I want to ask you about is meaning. Is philosophy a search for meaning?
I'm very suspicious historically and intellectually of the promise of meaning, because meaning has often had very fascistoid, non-progressivist edges, if not a core of that sort of thing. Excuse me. So that very often also the emergency supplies of meaning that are brought to a given incident or structure or theme in one's life are cover-ups, are a way of dressing the wound of non-meaning. I think it's very hard to keep things in the tensional structure of the openness, whether it's ecstatic or not, of non-meaning. That's very, very difficult, which is why there's then the quick grasp for transcendental signifier, for God, for nation, for patriotism. It's been very devastating, this craving for meaning, though it's something with which we are in constant negotiation. Everyone wants something like meaning. But when you see these dogs play, why reduce it to meaning rather than just see the arbitrary eruption of something that can't be grasped or explicated, but it's just there in this kind of absolute contingency of being. To leave.
Okay, quickly. If this woman offers you a red pill, you have a 50% chance of waking up outside of the Matrix and a 50% chance of waking up sore in Burning Man. Like that's one of those ways it goes.
I think what's kind of funny is that ST and I were talking about this very problem with this very cynicism within postmodern philosophy. ST, would you like to share some of those ideas? Do you remember that?
No.
This is Avital Ronell, by the way. It's from a 2008 documentary where they talk to all the most big-brained left-wing social philosophers, like Slavoj Žižek is in there, Cornel West is in there. It's a whole panoply of the most esoteric left-wing, the high IQ theory that they make up. But she's literally like saying, oh, don't pursue meaning because that's fascistoid. Be like dogs because that's more intuitive and spontaneous and free-flowing. But continue what we were going to say, ST.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk about it, but I guess I have to. I'm
Oh,
joking.
I could. I mean, I could.
No, I'm joking. Don't worry.
Okay.
so the reason I jokingly said no is that it's a massive topic and it's very hard to get to. So I think the best way to kind of cut it short and to shortly explain it would again also something we just talked about, and that is entropy, right? Like basically what she sees is that so entropy, if we kind of put it in an abstract, is the availability of energy. What she sees is that if entropy is low, which also means that meaning is high because exceptionality is high. And exceptionality is kind of what points us to meaning. Meaning, of course, being just the pointing towards an even further existing reality. So, for example, the liturgy has meaning because it points us to the supreme reality of Christ. We don't understand that, it doesn't have any meaning to us. Again, entropy being low means exceptionality is high, which means meaning is high, which means that energy is available, which is something that successful social movements use to levy huge effects. So, for example, if we look at the mid-century Germans, then they use this massive availability of energy to completely reconstruct the Western society. And basically, what she does says in a very, very, let's say, roundabout way, and kind of like in a way so that you didn't hear it before, is that we're afraid of power, and we're afraid of what people can do with power. So therefore, there shouldn't be no power at all. And that is in the end what she proposes. Is she proposes that you see the dogs, and she even says that as something random and emergent. And the idea there is that basically the alternative to a high entropy state of conceptualizing reality would just be, well, a low entropy state in which you see no availability of anything within the system, and you don't make any informational grasps at the system. I hope I'm not losing anyone here. Basically, what you're saying is, I don't know anything about what is going on here. So you make the potentials that are there unavailable to yourself. Thereby, it's at least from a relative frame kind of going low entropy, because again, everything is unavailable. And instead saying this is all random chance, this is all just the allocation of the moment. And basically, so what she just proposes is that what we have seen in so many ways proposes that, oh no, power is evil, let's just all, smoke a peace pipe, man, and sit around and don't do anything. And the way William wanted to connect that to postmodernism is that in postmodernism, what you'd also do is that you, and I am actually a postmodernist in many ways, but you also challenge things and challenge exceptionalities and challenge constructs. And usually the way most postmodernists do that is that they just basically take things they haven't examined to the same degree to which they examine that which they challenge. So, for example, they challenge patriarchy, put in its place matriarchy, because they don't examine matriarchy to the same degree they do patriarchy. And then they just kind of declare it done. And that is basically what she in the end does, because she doesn't examine the real society that would emerge if you actually just saw the dogs as something random happening and something that doesn't have any intrinsic meaning to it.
That's right. So we want to go around the panel on this one. I felt like it was juicy, where she, one of those smoking gun moments, like the Sam Harris clip where he was saying all that stuff. Like when Peterson says, "I'm going to smoking gun moment," where he's supposed to explicate a deeper theology, and then he doesn't say it at all. I think this clip was full of smoking guns and smoke and everything, and smoke and mirrors and no meaning. So let's go around. I mean, Seller, what did you think of it?
I mean, ST definitely stunned me with his brilliance once again. But the clip, I don't know. I mean, I didn't find it anything particularly surprising. It's what I've heard from lefties many times. It's just, meaning, truth, objectivity is racist. It's nothing really new.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. I mean, this is something that's been emerged in the last 2 years that is, I guess I gradually began to see it, but as sort of the old fogey on this panel, I mean, this was certainly not very apparent in the 90s, closer to when this movie was made, is just the extent to which leftism has become just quietism, like this philosophy of hedonistic self-negation of like all special will, and all longing for something higher other than to kind of sublimate one's own will to like this bureaucracy of niceness. I mean, this is something that is not what was promised to us and sort of the energetic motion that you felt in the leftism of the 70s that seemed to be pouring out of bands that were previously referenced, like the Grateful Dead or Led Zeppelin or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I'm sure if, I don't know, like 5 years ago or something, if when I was a neocon or a libertarian, I saw that clip, I would be soy jacking and saying, oh, this is what the libtards are really like, and I would be shocked and everything. But I don't know, I've just seen this so many times now that I don't find it anything particularly surprising. And but this is a very common thing where we like satirize leftists, and it's really the satire is just repeating what they say. Objectivity is inherently oppressive. I mean that's probably, you can probably find a direct quote somewhere of a leftist saying that. I remember once for school, I read a feminist paper, and this was a while ago, so I can't. It wasn't too recently, so I can't remember exactly what it said. But it was about feminism, and it was from a feminist, and the author was overtly arguing with no ambiguity that that technological progress is the only way to reach real feminism, because we eventually need to get to a degree of technological progress where all the things that make women unique is no longer necessary. And in particular, the main thing that I think the author was referring to was artificial wombs. That the only way that inequality is just baked into the female capacity for reproduction. So the only way to overcome that is by being able to separate femininity and reproduction. So I mean, just what I mean, this is funny because feminists normally say that this is just the result of like the sexist patriarchy that's oppressing women. But the author was overtly saying that really the problem is just biology itself. So it's not like, obviously most leftists aren't going to just say the phrase objectivity is inherently offensive, but this really is more or less where leftists often will come to.
And I completely agree with that, obviously. And
sorry, someone says xenofeminism. I mean, I remember actually MRAs saying basically the same thing, that like the way we'll defeat feminism is with artificial wombs. So I guess that's like gender politics horseshoe theory.
We are numb to it because we've heard this stuff flat out because we're just so base and ripped. But also going off of what Dave was saying, where and by the way, this documentary was 14 years ago, but obviously, these kinds of stuff hierarchically diffuses from these intellectuals down into the normie lefties and everything. So that took time, obviously. But contrasting the 60s, 70s fervor of probably some of these same intellectuals, whatever, that same protest fervor that the left had then, comparing it now to the Adderall-riddled Xanax, just completely anesthetized left now, where it's just so conformist, so lackadaisical. I think this is just demonstrating the historical movement of how the regime was able to contain and capture the same movement of people. So from the 70s and everything, well, that's when they were supposedly opposing the regime in certain ways. Obviously, they were being promoted. But, if I was the CIA, if I was the intelligence agencies, if I was the national security, blah, 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 alphabet agencies apparatus, and looking at the progress they made with the left, turning those 70s people, capturing the ideology into now where it's just this rampant conformism, it would just be an absolutely stunning success. Because even though, it's like Avital Ronell here looks like some really avant-garde, postmodern leftist professor and everything, and she's really out of it, wherever. I think like what she's exactly saying there, the core of leftism is so perfect for an oligarchic regime like this, where, when she's talking about the dogs, it's obviously she's trying to promote this spontaneous animalistic emptiness, right? She quote unquote says, it's just there in this kind of absolute contingency of being. Someone in the chat asked, well, what does it mean for the dogs to be absolutely contingent? Well, it really means they're dependent, that they're going moment for moment from the most recent proximate stimuli to them. They're completely passive. Where you know how dogs react, where they jump up when the other one jumps up and stuff. And that's
the very thing that makes it contingent in that sense also makes it necessary for it to be managed. And
Exactly. So, see, we're on the same mind here. So really, yeah, when it's contingent, that literally means it's dependent on something else for its being and its purpose and everything. So this is just so perfect for a managerial oligarchy as an ideology for all the regular people to be so passive, completely submissive in the moment, where, you know, at the same time, I don't show this clip in there, but Avital Granell is like spurgs out against Bush or something. It's like, oh, this human figure that I can see, and what he was imposing the death penalty, and that's so tyrannical. So it's like when individual people come to leftists and they try and impose something, they really resist it. But when something's depicted as the environment, as it's just how we do things, it's just, you know, the kind of managerial waters we swim in, then it's completely acceptable. So this is exactly how a managerial oligarchy would love it, because it's like all their specimens are resistant to personal human, you know, resistance and influence, but they just completely accept whatever comes down the pipeline from on high. So I don't know. It just seems right. I mean, she literally says you should be an NPC. She's doing the NPC meme before it became cool.
What I would wonder is, I guess I'm going to ask a bit of a meta question. How does this relate to Jordan Peterson and his video?
I mean,
oh, go ahead.
Thank you. Something I just came up with, because it kind of like went through my mind with all of this, and also him mentioning the NPC meme is right. Like this happens, let's say what we would call like the finalization really of the managerial revolution, and kind of the idea of just going along. So leftism gives up the idea of activism and goes into the hippie, like the hippie and like don't do anything and radical individualism and all of that. Late John Lennon phase, again with late John Lennon, with the late 1970s. And at the same time, the banking just goes, let's say, ballistic. So the reason for that is a guy called Wright Patman is ousted from office. He was on the banking committee. He was ousted from office in 1976. And he was kind of the only guy who really kept the banking cartels in the United States in check, because his government, the FDR government, whom he was still a veteran of, believed that fascism was basically big business plus big finance, which is something by the way, when people call Elon Musk a fascist, that's where that comes from. It comes from FDR. They even wrote books about it that were hugely read. But banking explodes in 75. And what happens basically is that the leftists are immediately pushed to the side, and this managerial state takes over and basically becomes the foundation of the new left. The Watergate babies get into office, who are kind of like the new left that we know nowadays and still are in office, right? They got pretty old at this point. And this is also when things such as the idea of cyberpunk start to develop, and of cyberspace, and all of these kind of escape ideas, more experimentation with LSD, all of that individualism and denial of reality just comes into being because of that coming into place, and that allowance by the let's say by the powers that be in the United States of giving these banks the powers that they now suddenly have. I mean, in 75 again, banks also just they more or less run New York for a short while, because just the city goes bankrupt and banks basically take over for a while. So that is in the end what both Peterson and this woman kind of draw upon, because Peterson very much is a child of the subculture, right? He is and he does always advocate for his individualism, which is something really weird, especially considering his psychology, because Jungian psychology and kind of in deep psychology, where you go into the unconscious and it's making up. You don't really conceive of people as individuals anymore, because we just operate on this framework, which is all input from other people, which we call subpersonalities. And but the way he kind of meshes this up is just again with that learned inaction that leftists were more or less given in the late 1970s and early 1980s.
And that was very nice, ST. And Buckley, so you wanted me, I'll also give another answer to how Peterson and Avital Ronell are similar and why it's so related. So essentially, we're seeing here how the quote unquote centrist classical liberal Peterson and the postmodern leftist Ronell are really just two sides of the same coin, in that you are not allowed to pursue any fundamental theology or even philosophy below the surface, but you're just remaining in this realm of intuitions and feelings and premonitions. And for Peterson, his particular appetites were those classical liberal slogans that he went with. But the only difference is that Ronell is kind of letting the cat out of the bag and admitting that there's no fundamental meaning undergirding these intuitions that are coming to mind. But with Peterson, he's really trying hard to construct something without that foundation at all. So it really is just the same side of the coin, except one's being more explicit, one's being implicit.
Yep. Yeah. I would like to highlight some comments briefly. Big D says, "Is this about the Conservative Manifesto?" Why is it that like the people that watch my channel are such morons? I would think if you just read the title, it should be pretty obvious that's what this is referring to. Is Jordan B. Peterson's vision of conservatism in the church cringe? I wonder what video this is in response to. But if you read the description, I think it should make it even clearer. And I mean, it has the videos linked. So why are you in the chat asking that when you could just like read the title, read the description, or go down to the video and click on it? Why are my viewers so stupid? And then he said another thing. He said, if so, answer is yes. Cringe. Oh, wow. Thanks. Yeah, I really cared what Big D thought about this. Thank you very much. Yes, come in right now at the end of the stream. You ask me a ridiculous question that you could have figured out, and then you say, yes, the answer is yes. Wow. I just, thanks everyone. I was waiting this whole time on Big D's answer to the question. Very, very helpful. Thank you very much, Big D. I would like to highlight another comment for the opposite side. I have no idea how I'm supposed to pronounce that, but ST is a real almond activator when he speaks. Have him on more often, settlers. Okay, I mean, I'm dinging a few points here because you called me settlers. If you're referring to me, I'm called Settler. The S is if you're referring to the whole channel name Settlers Lament. It's just Settler, okay? There's no Settlers. I'm not Settlers. It's Settlers Lament or it's Settler. But, you know, that aside, thank you. This is actually a very helpful comment. I like to know who you guys enjoy, who you don't. If you very much hate 21st, I mean, he's my minion, so I can't get rid of him. But let me know if you hate 21st. But this is actually helpful feedback. So thank you very much.
Maybe you should highlight that comment that is actually giving feedback about the minion.
Yes, I don't think I can find that again. Sorry.
Yes, you can. I scrolled up to it.
1 second.
The minion already prepared it.
Well, I don't think my minion can highlight comments, unfortunately.
Yeah, I can't. I'm just saying Charlemagne said.
Okay, here it is. Charlemagne says #1 minion of all time. I mean, Charlemagne never clarified. Charlemagne never clarified who this is in reference to, so I'm going to assume it's not you because you could not possibly be the #1 minion of all time. I mean, I have to say, I mean, Cringe Walker is actually a really good minion. He makes all my thumbnails now. And my thumbnails, if you look at my old thumbnails, were terrible. And my new thumbnails are usually great. Occasionally he does a lackluster thumbnail, but usually Cringe Walker is really good at making thumbnails. So I have to be honest, in my like list of minions, I'd have to say Cringe Walker probably is #1 and 21st are probably #2. Sorry.
All right, so any of you other guys, Furious, Will, whoever, had comments on whatever, on that stuff?
Well, I'll let Furious go.
I was just going to say, I actually nothing to add. So, William, by all means, mate, you go ahead.
Well, I guess we never really needed to go into the different points and points and virtues that Jordan Peterson lists by virtue of the fact that he never gives any justification for them. Just pointing out that he does not give any justification for them, and is enough really to show that this whole video about this conservative manifesto, not Settler Laments video, obviously, because this is a really good video, I might say. Thanks in all part to all the wonderful people here, but I'm talking about Jordan B. Peterson's video was just kind of a waste of time for people who want to understand conservatism or understand the canonical Western virtues. Don't go to this video. Don't go to this conservative manifesto video that Jordan Peterson put out. It is cringe, and it is cringe because it is without substance.
Yeah, I mean, I would say even if like obviously I don't think any of us here really agree with sort of classical liberalism, and that I think is the main difference we have between us and Peterson is that we're not classical liberals. He is. But even if you sort of grant classical liberalism for the sake of argument, I don't think it's a particularly good or useful video. I don't really see what new he is really contributing to the discussion by the video. Even if you concede that this sort of center-right classical liberalism is the correct belief system, it's really just reiterating the same sort of basic talking points. And I mean, it's one like. Of course, this is YouTube. You have to have realistic expectations of what you're expecting from someone on YouTube. But someone who bills himself as a public intellectual like Jordan B. Peterson, I expect a bit more than just reiterating the same basic classical liberal talking points in a video where he's trying to make a positive case, as he said, or present a positive vision of conservatism. So yeah, I would say even on its own on its own standards, it's not a successful video.
Yeah, I actually to think I was such a nerd. I had out this one book from this one manual, a manual of political philosophy, integralism, and yet I didn't get the chance to use it for the stream.
No, I mean, we don't have to end right at 2 hours. If you would like to quote anything from it, feel free.
I mean,
is there anything in there about the sovereign citizen?
Sovereign citizen. Is there?
I'm saying that because that's what Peterson said 1,000 times. Just so you know, audience.
Let's see. Citizen. There is a. This is okay. So we have plenty of stuff about coercion here. Nothing about citizens, but plenty about authority and coercion. Let's see. Yeah, it's basically. I mean, I quote it. I would. The whole book is basically just that. This book is how you write out a political system that is rooted in theology and metaphysics. And you do have at the end of each chapter, in case you don't want to read through the whole length of the book, you can look at the end of each chapter, and it just has a list of like bullet points, points of theses that the chapter spells out, and what the and I guess I could quote one of the first theses of the first chapter of the book, which is that politics is the study of the highest good, proportionate to human nature, which may be obtained on earth. And I think that a deficit in Peterson's understanding here is that he doesn't seem to know what the highest good to be obtained on earth. If he had started with that and then moved to the subsidiary goods that follow from that, like, for example, free markets, I don't know, maybe he would have had something more solid. That would be my critique of Peterson at the end of the day, that there's just nothing there. There's not even a telos.
Yeah, I mean, I guess more broadly, if you're going to discuss virtue, which is really the sort of main thing he's trying to talk about in this video, or one of the main things, a definition of what you mean by virtue would be very helpful. With that said, Big D also said, "Lol, it's not a super chat. What are you reading this?" Well, are you new here, Big D? Have you ever watched a Settlers Lament live stream before? I always call out my viewers when they're morons, and you're being a moron, so I'm going to call you out. I don't know why this is difficult for you to understand. I mean, I wouldn't be so rude to you if you were paying me. So if you want to pay me in the future to say stupid things, then maybe I'll ignore your stupidness. But I don't have a problem calling out people for free. And also, June says singular settler. Yes, thank you very much, June. That is, you call me settler, singular, no apostrophe s. That's how it works. It's not that complicated.
Oh man, cue Jimmy Thomas's meme about assaulting your audiences.
He shows no mercy here.
And thank you very much for the compliment. Settler is such an autist. Ha 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 ha. Thank you. So yes, one thing I had in my notes I want to bring up. I assume we're going to end soon, but one thing from this video, from the conservatism video that I wanted to mention, was he says this gets into the same thing I've criticized before. That is just the entire video seems incredibly anachronistic with how he talks about the Western canon, but then the Western tradition, and these are Western values, but really what he is referring to is a very narrow slice of modern Western post-Enlightenment history. He says, the most fundamental freedom upon which virtuous states and politics depend, freedom of speech and freedom of thought among them, exists not for momentary gratification, but so that truth can find its living expression. I mean, that's not necessarily a word for word quote, so I look up the video if you want to get exactly what he said. This is just what I write down in my notes, but that's basically what he said. And I just, this is again just so ridiculously anachronistic. I know the perception of free speech that Jordan Peterson has is something that's incredibly modern and incredibly, again, narrowly defined. If Canada was going to institute blasphemy laws today, which side do we think Jordan Peterson would be on? I'm sure he would be against blasphemy laws. This is the very argument people often make against hate speech laws, is that they're just modern day blasphemy laws. Well, I mean, the traditional Western concept of free speech had allowance for blasphemy laws. And I'm not even saying you have to support blasphemy laws. I'm just saying that if you're talking about the long Western history, the long Western tradition, but then you use this like 1990s concept of this very hyper modern 1990s concept of free speech, then you're not really talking about any sort of long, deep Western tradition. You're talking about a very narrow set of modern history. And of modern liberal tradition. So it's just he sort of, and I mean this is a very common thing for classical liberals to do. I'm not saying this is unique to Peterson, but he's just projecting these very historically contingent ideas all the way into the past, acting as though there's a longer precedent for them than there really is. And got another super chat. For $5. I hate for you to insult your audience for free. Here's some money. Thank you very much.
So good.
You should have insulted him.
No,
well, I mean, if you want me to insult you, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of lame that you don't have a profile picture. Like that's pretty lazy. I know you don't have me much to work with here. But I'll criticize you for that. You should get a profile picture. Stop being lazy. Blasphemy laws traditionally were fine. I mean, I mean, again, I'm not like, I don't care whether or not you support blasphemy laws. My point is just that my point is just that Peterson's concept of free speech is not anything deeply rooted in Western history. 150 years ago, most people that would have considered themselves as supporting free speech would have supported blasphemy laws.
True.
So where does that leave us? Are we done? Does anyone else have anything to add?
Just on Lycus very quickly, do decide if you're going to do the Greek or the Latin spelling of your name, because you have a hard K with a U. It should be like K-O or C-U. Decide. Don't mix languages, please.
The roasting continues.
Mixed languages, will we have words like automobile? Isn't that a mixture?
Well,
Would it be like automacon or something like that?
Look,
Yeah,
I
I
speak
suppose.
American, and I hold the most valuable piece of paper backed by the full faith and credit of Jerome Powell, US dollars, the only real dollar. Nobody can say, oh, this is a dollar. No, it's only the US.
Well, we can call it the real petrodollar 21, I suppose. That's true for the moment, at least.
Yes, that's right. So yeah, no, I mean, unfortunately, what Peterson said is cringe, but
Yes, I suppose I saw Charlemagne saying earlier that he will defer to my judgment on this matter, and I can have the final say on whether or not this video is cringe. And I do officially declare now that his conservatism video was indeed cringe. So I guess that's it. Are we shilling, or does anyone have any final thoughts on the topic before we
You're
close?
here.
I think you've summarized it nicely, but I mean, yes, it is fake and it is flaccid and it is largely misrepresented, and you should be disappointed in his really shoddy attempt to try and describe non-conservatism and present it as something dressed up in a cheap frock, which is exactly what he's done.
Yeah, no, totally agree. So yeah, I mean, unless anyone else has any other closing thoughts, feel free to shill, guys. ST, you can go first.
Okay, first of all, shout out to Raging Mandarin in the chat. I think it was also streaming today, but I forgot, or maybe there was on another day. But other than that, yeah, I have a YouTube channel. During this stream, I actually broke, because I'm not a team yet, 300 subscribers. So go there. It's if you kind of liked my out there takes, what I'm really trying on my YouTube channel, I guess it's a bit of a commitment to watch it, because it's like it has this structure in it, and you kind of have to kind of go along. And I promise the video quality gets better as the numbers get higher. But it is kind of an idiosyncratic look at philosophy, history, tradition, and it's kind of trying to propose something and develop something that connects us to the pre-modern era, while also taking in the, let's say, the worthwhile insights of everything that came in the last 500 years. And I also have a Substack, which I'm going to rededicate soon, which is called Short-Term Thoughts. At the moment, there's only a few pieces on there, and I envision at the moment to kind of rededicate it to covering mostly social theory. So if that is something that interests you, you might be interested in my Substack, Short-Term Thoughts. Again, the YouTube channel is ST, just like my name. Used to be Structured Thoughts, now it's ST. I think it's nicer. And the other one is Short-Term Thoughts.
Okay, cool. Check it out. And everyone is, of course, linked in the description. 21st, go ahead.
yeah, so believe it or not, I know it's like I only post a video every few months, but I have been quote unquote busy with other stuff. But right now I am writing a few scripts. So legit, I'm writing a few scripts. Might pop something else. Check your notification feed, if you will. Honestly, I don't know how some of these other guys do it. If you have like other stuff to do regular life, how you could make like a full fleshed out edited video. These guys are amazing. So watch their videos as well. But yeah, next person.
Furious, I know all you have is a Twitter account, but did you want to shill that?
Yes, of course. If you'd like to follow for shits and giggles. But actually, I have to apologize if I was a little bit spaced out at times. I have just come off the back of part 2, Apostolic Majesty, and I have been doing like a little mini series on Armenia. It's inappropriately called A Brief History, but nothing that Apostolic Majesty and I and Columba together do is ever brief. But we've just started a mini series on the vast history of Armenia, which sort of covers a good 14, 15 centuries worth. So we finished that about an hour before Settlers started, and of course it's great to be back on the world famous Settlers Lament channel. Lovely to be back on with the guys, Dave and 21, etc. And yeah, thanks for having me on. It was actually worth fleshing this out, because when I actually saw AA and Charlie do this on Cigar Stream, I was almost rendered mute at the idiocy of it all. I'm not saying that Peterson didn't try to do something good, but we needed to flesh it out more, and I think we've done a good job of that today. So thanks for having me back, Settler.
Yeah, thanks. No worries. I usually try to, when I see other people are doing the same video I'm responding to, I usually try to ignore it, because I hate getting the feeling that I'm saying the same thing that other people have already said. But it's good to hear you think that we contributed different stuff.
All right. The Applied Virtue has its own YouTube channel and its own Substack, where I keep all of the essays. I have a few projects I'm working on in the background. My main one being an analysis online. I'm trying to get my hands on a book called Disordered Actions, a moral analysis of lying and homosexual activity, which makes the case that the two are both wrong for very similar reasons, namely that they are disordered in an objective sense. And I want to really make that apparent and do some real applied ethics, unlike this person, the Jordan Peterson, who is just throwing out principles willy-nilly. I'm going to try and ground my principles on something that is real and solid. That said, now that I have seen this video and was told about it, I'm very much tempted to want to do my own version, maybe an integralist manifesto, or a based Catholic or a based Catholic manifesto.
Well, mine, of course, will be called the Vatican II Catholic Manifesto.
Of course, I as a based integralist do affirm Vatican II as a legitimate ecumenical council.
I would offer my opinion, but I've sworn off all theology debates on social media for at least 2 months.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Dave, I'm sure everyone here is already subscribed to, but did you want to chill at all?
Yeah, I'm very sleepy, Dave, the distributist. Follow me on YouTube. I have a Substack that I need to contribute to, but real life constantly gets in the way. So thanks for having me on. It was a great discussion.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it too. So yeah, thank you, everyone. Of course, be sure to subscribe to me, the world famous Settlers Lament, if you're not already subscribed. And I should hopefully be, at the very least, I hope I can be doing weekly live streams. I would like to do weekly edited videos also, or at least monthly edited videos. That would be a significant increase. So hopefully I'll have a lot more regular content than I've been having over the past year or so. But either way, hopefully I've said that many times before, so hopefully this will actually be accurate to this time. But that's really all for me. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Goodbye, everyone, and God save the King.